Okay, we're looking now at Mencius. The important part here from the Mencius material, there's a lot to talk about if you really wanted to spend the time doing it. The important thing here about the Mencius material is that he describes human nature as essentially good. Now let's take a moment here to talk about two things. One, human nature. Well, what on earth is human nature? It's not clear to a lot of people that there is any such thing. Our Western intellectual tradition talks about John Locke. And John Locke teaches that we are a tabula rasa, a blank slate, something that anything could be written on, and therefore there are no pre-existing conditions, as it were, in the human mind. We are neither good nor evil. We are neither social or antisocial. We are neither wise nor foolish. All of this comes through experience of the world. And that's how our goodness is shaped. It's how our weakness is shaped. Everything is shaped through experience, according to John Locke. And as I say, the empirical Anglo-American philosophical tradition. And it's the one we're most familiar with. Nevertheless, all the time we talk about human nature. And I guess what we're trying to say are things which are common to all human beings. Just that simple. The essence of what it is to be human. And as I say, Mencius suggests that human nature is essentially good. That is to say, well, as he puts it, and I give you this from page hang on here. Yeah, page 384 in the book. Okay? A man is capable of becoming good. That is what I mean by good. As for his becoming bad, that is not the fault of his native endowment. So, when we become bad, yeah, I paused it and moved. Okay. So we're good by nature. When we go wrong, when we are evil, it is because of something that has happened in our world to take away from our evilness. We fell into bad teachers. We fell into bad habits. We have some great calamity beset us, and instead of falling back on our natures, we fell back on the calamity. That's what Mencius is teaching. He looks at several supposed counterexamples to his position and simply works his way around them. Now this brings us to several points that we ought to think about. One, premises, basic fundamental level premises, are not the sorts of things that you're ever going to be able to prove or disprove. And I want you to remember that. You can only get to where you get based on where you started from. This is an important thing for you to know. Fundamental premises usually are not the kinds of things that are open to challenge. Every now and then, because the fundamental premise is based on something empirical, and that kind of comes up a little bit here in Mencius. Some of his claims for why he holds this premise fall back on observation of the world. But mostly he interprets the world in terms of the observation. That is to say, when he gives us, when we get the stories of people who seem to be naturally evil or behavior that's naturally human beings that appears to be evil, he always just reinterprets those things and shows us that no, those either really aren't evil at all, or they aren't really natural at all. But we would only accept that reasoning because we start out by accepting the idea that human nature is good. If we were to accept the doctrines that human nature is open, than his suggestion. I mean, he says nobody could look at a child about to fall into a well and not want to run over and save it. Let me tell you, I can do it. Okay? And if I can do it, there's lots of people who can do it. In fact, there are people who would go and push the kid in. You know that. I know that. Especially other kids. So that's just something to bear in mind, that he doesn't really rely on observation here. He takes it as a given. And then he reinterprets all the things he sees in terms of his given position. Again, we could just as easily say, as, for example, Jonathan Edwards says. For those of you not acquainted with Jonathan Edwards, go to Google, Jonathan Edwards, Sinner in the Hands of an Angry God. And according to Jonathan Edwards, we're evil. We are evil right to the bottom. And the only reason we don't all go to hell is because God mercifully, graciously extends salvation to some of us. Not all of us, not even many of us, but some of us. And that's purely God's grace. It has nothing to do with our goodness or mercy or anything other than God's mercy. So set aside, but you can, for every reading that shows Mencius uses to show that we're basically good, we could turn around and present a counter argument from Edwards' side. Edwards would say, no, you're right. Everyone would go to save that child, except of course we know there are exceptions. But all those who do so because of their education, that they have been educated in morality. Indeed, even Mencius emphasized the need to educate people in morality in order to keep them from being tempted by all the things that would lead them away from their natural inclination to be good. But what Edwards would say is through education, we take people away from their natural inclination to be bad. Others could just say it was open and argue that when we see this behavior, that's just our openness to the good. The others just our openness to the bad. We're no sort. Yes, he tries to argue to the contrary. But again, the weight of his argument turns on accepting at the outset that human beings are naturally good. One other thing about this idea that human beings are naturally good, what it then implies in our society. We then are not interested in... We spend a lot less time worrying about punishment and war and penalties and things like that. A lot more time worried about education, about making sure that everybody's well taken care of, that they won't be tempted into these calamity reactions or these reactions which aren't really truly a part of human nature, but rather are a corruption of it. And it changes the whole way your political system and your notion of a society works. Our goal here then is to remain true to who we are, and who we truly are is good. Unlike, say, the Puritan, Jonathan Edwards, who sees no problem with all kinds of penalties. I want to say it was his grandfather was involved in the Salem witch trials, or I may be confusing him with Nathaniel Hawthorne right now. But at any rate, the idea of capital punishment, the idea of long-term incarceration, the idea that people need to feel punishment for their crimes, as opposed to reform, as opposed to re-education, as opposed to improving society so that people don't fall prey to these things. See, in Edwards' world, everybody all the time is about to do this, and thus we have locks and we have demands and we have securities and so forth. In Mencius' world, everyone will do good if they're given the opportunity, if they aren't placed in a position where they'll be forced into doing wrong or steered into doing wrong or influenced into doing wrong. they receive the wrong education. This kind of thing is the real danger. And for Mencius, that's what we have to look out for. Naturally, human beings are good.